Ever stumble across a piece of history that just feels uh, a bit off, like something that doesn't quite fit the picture?
Yeah, something that makes you go, wait, they built what?
Exactly. And that's the kind of, well, historical head scratcher we're tackling
We're
today.
diving into the story of this concrete island in the Philippines. An island, but engineered to look and act like a battleship.
Right. Its guns are still there, rusting away, but they tell quite a story.
It's the imaginative leap that gets me. You've got naval tech moving fast, steel ships getting bigger, and then someone says, let's build one out of concrete and anchor it.
It's definitely unconventional for harbor defense, even back then.
Speaks to a very specific way of thinking, I suppose.
Yeah. And this isn't your typical old stone fort. This is Fort Drum, originally Fraile Island, smack bang at the entrance to Manila Bay.
Built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, took them years, like 1909 to maybe 1918. They literally shaved down an island.
And sculpted into this heavily armed thing, the nickname, the concrete battleship.
Which is such a contradiction, isn't it? It can't move, but it's got the firepower of a ship.
Absolutely. Immobile, yet projecting massive force.
It really captures that moment where fixed forts were still seen as, well, crucial, protecting those big harbors.
And we've got some great sources for this deep dive.
Yeah, a good mix. Atlas Obscura, Wikipedia, traceofwar.com, War History Online. There's even a Reddit thread we looked at.
Plus material from the Army Historical Foundation, Francis J. Allen's book, The Concrete Battleship, Descriptions and Reviews Anyway, and an article from Explorer magazine.
And the visuals really help paint the picture. Maps, aerial shots, those profile views.
Photos of the island before they started, or diagrams showing the inside. It's quite something.
Construction photos, pics of the guns rusting away now. It really helps visualize it.
So our mission today is really to unpack this whole story for you. Why build it? How? What did it do, especially in World War II?
And what's left of it now? We're digging for those, surprising details that make history come alive.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, the genesis. Why build this concrete monster in the first place?
Well, you got to look at the context, right? End of the 19th, start of the 20th century, big changes happening.
Like the Spanish-American War.
Exactly. The U.S. suddenly has new territories, the Philippines being a big one.
And Manila Bay was key strategically.
Hugely important. So defending it became a top priority. Needed stronger defenses than what Spain left behind.
So the thinking was naval power alone isn't enough. We need permanent forts.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
There was this body, the Board of Fortifications, William H. Taft was chairing it, and they pushed for upgrading harbor defenses.
Okay.
And that led to the decision to fortify several islands there, including little El Fraile.
But the initial plan wasn't quite so battleship-y.
No, not at first. Early ideas were more conventional, a mine control station, maybe some guns and casemates, protected concrete bunkers built into the island.
Standard stuff for the time.
Right. But they looked at the South Channel entrance to the bay and decided the existing plans weren't enough.
Too vulnerable. Ah, so that's when the more radical ideas surfaced.
Precisely. The idea to just level the island completely, build this massive concrete platform, and stick big naval guns in rotating armored turrets on top.
That's the leap. Not just adding guns to the island, but making the island into a weapon platform. Sounds like a massive job.
Oh, it was monumental. And what's really striking, Fort Drum is unique among American coastal forts from that whole era between the Civil War and WWII.
How so?
It was the only sea fort they built with fully enclosed, rotating steel turrets, like on a battleship.
Really? The only one?
Yep. Apparently the idea had come up before.
Yeah.
With the Endicott board, but it was just too expensive, like twice the cost of the standard disappearing guns they usually used.
The ones that popped up to fire and then dropped back down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the two turrets they finally approved for El Fraile, they were the only ones like that ever made for U.S. coastal defense.
Wow. That really underscores how unusual it was. A bold move, but maybe too pricey to repeat.
Seems that way. And they named it Fort Drum after Brigadier General Richard C. Drum.
A veteran, right? Mexican and Civil Wars.
That's him. He died in 1909, the same year they started construction. So a nod to military history there.
Okay, let's picture this transformation. El Fraile was just a rocky lump, 90 feet high at its peak?
Yeah, a rocky outcrop. And they basically chopped the top off and built this battleship shape on it.
What were the final dimensions?
About 350 feet long, 144 feet wide. The main deck ended up being 40 feet above the low tide mark.
And the construction itself must have been incredibly strong.
Unbelievably so. Thick steel-reinforced concrete everywhere. The overhead protection, the roof, was 20 feet thick.
20 feet?
Yeah, And the sidewalls, depending on the section, were between 25 and 36 feet thick.
36 feet thick. Good grief.
The sources basically say it was designed to be untouchable by naval gunfire of that time. And later events proved them right, mostly. Took over 1,000 hits in WWII and kept fighting.
Incredible resilience. So it wasn't just a solid block inside, obviously. What was the layout?
No, it was complex. Think 4 levels packed with essentials. There was an engine room, crucial, with 7 diesel generators for power.
Self-sufficient then.
Had to be. Then you had the magazines for the shells and powder, huge amounts needed for those big guns. A mining casemate for controlling harbor mines, storerooms, water tanks.
And living quarters. For how many people?
Accommodations for about 200 personnel. Plus a mess hall, a galley. The diagrams we have show it was like a little underground concrete town.
A submerged battleship, almost. And it had the features you'd expect on a ship, too.
Definitely. The big rotating turrets, obviously. But also a cage mast, 118 feet tall, like battleships had then, with searchlights.
Right, I've seen pictures of those masts.
And secondary guns in casemates along the sides, all contributing to that concrete battleship look. Oh, and a 5-ton crane, which they definitely need.
Like a dreadnought made of concrete. So when did this all happen? You said starting 1909.
Started April 1909. Some sources say finished by 1914, others push it to 1918. Took a while, whatever the exact date.
And the cost? I bet it wasn't cheap.
Not even close. Original estimate was over $1 million back in 1908 dollars.
Which was a lot of money then.
A huge amount. And the book description says the final cost considerably exceeded that. So yeah, building your one-of-a-kind concrete battleship doesn't come cheap.
No surprise there. Okay, so we've got this amazing structure. Let's talk firepower. What exactly was pointing out from those turrets?
Right, the main punch. That came from 4 14-inch M1909 naval rifles, big guns.
M1909s.
Yep. Mounted in 2 custom-built M1909 steel turrets, one stacked kind of on top of and behind the other superimposed.
Like on a battleship.
Exactly. These are batteries Marshall and Wilson. And the really interesting thing, these guns were made specifically for Fort Drum, never used anywhere else.
Wow. Completely unique weapon systems.
Think about it. Firing a shell that weighed almost a ton, hitting something nearly 11 miles away. That's serious coastal defense artillery for the era.
What kind of range and traverse did they have?
Pretty impressive. The front turret, Battery Marshall, could swing 230 degrees. The rear one, Battery Wilson, could do a full 360.
Full circle on the rear one. Useful.
Definitely. Both could elevate up to 15 degrees, giving them that max range of about 19,200 yards, just under 11 miles.
And the turrets themselves were heavily protected.
Oh, yeah. Armor plating up to 16 inches thick in places. Each gun barrel alone weighed 70 tons.
70 tons.
Massive things. Firing a 1,660-pound armor-piercing shell. You can see photos of them under construction. Gives you a sense of the scale.
That would definitely ruin an enemy ship's day. But it wasn't just the big guns, right? There was secondary armament, too.
Correct. They had 2 pairs of 6-inch guns, M1908 MII models. These were in armored casemates built into the sides of the hull.
Lower down.
Yeah, on the sides. Batteries Roberts and McRae.
So covering closer approaches or smaller targets.
Presumably. And then later they added anti-aircraft defenses. Around 1918, they put in 2 3-inch mobile AA guns on what they called spider mounts.
To deal with planes, obviously.
Right. Those were eventually replaced in 1934 with newer 3-inch M1917 AA guns. And then during World War II itself, they added .50 caliber machine guns for close-in air defense.
A layered defense, then. Big naval guns, medium guns, anti-aircraft, they seem to have thought it through.
Tried to cover the bases, yeah.
And the battery names, Marshall, Wilson, Roberts, McRae, they weren't just random.
No, they honored significant military figures. The 14-inch batteries, Marshall and Wilson, were named in 22 after former chiefs of engineers.
Okay.
And the 6-inch ones, Roberts and McRae, were named after artillery officers, brigadier generals. So tying it into Army history.
Right. So you have this incredibly armed, seemingly invulnerable fortress sitting there. What was life actually like for the soldiers stationed there before the war broke out? Must have been unusual.
The sources suggest it wasn't exactly comfortable. A big issue was ventilation. Imagine being inside that concrete box, no windows, in the tropical heat and humidity of the Philippines.
Yeah, sounds pretty grim, stuffy and hot.
Definitely. It got so bad that in the 1930s, they actually built a 2-story wooden barracks building right on the top deck.
On top of the concrete battleship.
Yeah, you can see it in some photos. Looks a bit odd, like an afterthought. But presumably, it was to give the men somewhere less confining and better ventilated to live.
Must have been a relief, even if it looks strange. What else did they do? Just drills all day?
Lots of drills, yeah. Target practice, constant maintenance on the guns and machinery. That was crucial.
Kept them busy, I guess. Any weird stories?
Well, one source mentions the soldiers used to go shark fishing off the side.
Shark fishing. Off the fort.
Apparently. Maybe help pass the time, being stuck out there.
Gives fishing off the pier a whole new meaning. Anything else?
There's a photo showing a volleyball court marked out on the concrete deck.
Volleyball on the concrete battleship. Okay, that's brilliant. Little slice of normal life.
Trying to make the best of it, I suppose.
But that relative quiet didn't last, obviously. World War II arrived. Let's get into the siege of Fort Drum.
Right. As things got serious, the fort was mainly crewed by E Battery of the 59th Coast Artillery Regiment.
But they got reinforcements.
Yeah, as war looked likely, they were joined by some U.S. Marines, Filipino scouts, and even some civilian ordnance experts. Brought the total garrison up to about 240 men at its peak.
And one of the first things they did was...
Tear down that wooden barracks on top.
To clear the field of fire for Battery Wilson, the rear turret.
Exactly. Practical, but probably made living conditions even tighter down below.
Then the attack started.
Yes. First major hit was a heavy Japanese air raid on January 2nd, 1942.
Did it do much damage?
Surprisingly little, according to the sources. That thick concrete deck really did its job against bombs.
But the air attacks weren't the main threat, were they?
No. The real pressure came starting in February 42. The Japanese set up heavy artillery batteries on the mainland near Ternate, 150mm guns, and later, even bigger, 240mm howitzers.
Firing directly at the fort.
Day after day, sustained bombardment, and that started doing some damage.
Like what?
It knocked out one of the 3-inch LA guns, damaged one of the 6-inch gun casemates, and started chipping away chunks of concrete from the main structure. Spalling, they call it.
But the main turrets, the 14-inch guns.
This is the crucial part.
Huh.
The sources are clear that the heavily armored 14-inch turrets were never put out of action. They took hits, sure, but they kept working throughout the siege.
Amazing. Could they shoot back effectively at the Japanese guns?
They tried. Fired their 14-inch guns, and the mortars over at Fort Frank nearby also fired, but apparently it wasn't very effective. The Japanese positions were well hidden and dug in, hard targets to hit.
Still, Fort Drum holds a particular distinction from early in the war, right?
It does. First American seacoast battery to fire on the enemy in World War II.
When was that?
January 13th, 1942. They spotted a Japanese commandeered steamer trying to sneak around the back of the fort, probably doing reconnaissance.
And they opened fire.
Yep, drove it off. Apparently, the concrete for one of their newly moved 3-inch gun emplacements hadn't even fully cured yet.
Talk about eager to get into the fight. But its biggest moment probably came during the fall of Corregidor.
Absolutely critical moment. Night of May 5th, 1942. The Japanese were launching their final big assault on Corregidor Island.
The second wave of landings.
Right, and Fort Drum's 14-inch guns just opened up on them. They fired into the landing barges, sank several of them, caused heavy casualties among the Japanese troops.
A devastating intervention.
Bought the defenders on Corregidor some valuable time, though ultimately it wasn't enough.
Because Corregidor fell the next day, May 6th. What happened to Fort Drum then?
With Corregidor gone, Fort Drum's position was hopeless. They were ordered to surrender, along with the other harbor forts.
Did they just hand it over intact?
No way. Before surrendering, the garrison did everything they could to disable the main guns.
Oh.
They drained the hydraulic fluid from the recoil cylinders that stops the guns from returning to battery after firing. They jammed sandbags and junked down the muzzles.
Sabotage, basically.
Totally. They even fired off the last rounds using the biggest possible powder charges, hoping to damage the gun barrels themselves. And they flooded the powder magazines.
Making sure the Japanese couldn't use those guns later. Smart.
Definitely. And what's truly incredible, considering the months of shelling it endured.
The casualties.
Almost none. Only 5 men in the garrison were wounded during the entire siege. No one was killed.
That's unbelievable after taking over 1,000 hits.
Speaks volumes about the fort's construction. But beyond the concrete, it's also about the defenders' resourcefulness under that pressure.
Yeah, like that story about the gunpowder. That's amazing.
Isn't it? The exhaust fans for the powder magazines weren't working properly because they were firing the gun so much.
It got hot down there.
Really hot. And this had an unexpected effect on the gunpowder. Made it burn faster when the guns fired.
Which did what? Increase the power?
Exactly. Increased the muzzle velocity, which meant the shells actually traveled further than their designed maximum range of 19,200 yards.
So they could hit targets they weren't supposed to be able to reach.
Precisely. They were able to effectively hit Japanese positions over on the Bataan Peninsula, which was over 20,000 yards away, provided crucial support for Corregidor's defense.
Wow. An accidental range boost from faulty ventilation? You couldn't make it up.
Necessity and maybe a bit of unintended thermodynamics helping the defense. They fired over 100 rounds under those conditions.
And managing supplies must have been tough too. Food, water.
Extremely tough. They had to cut meal sizes right down. They broke out something called the Typhoon Ration Emergency Supply.
And water, always critical.
They actually dismantled a wooden water tank they had on the top deck, just to use the wooden parts in the engine room. And they started using empty 14-inch powder canisters to store extra water whenever they could collect some.
Using shell casings for water storage? That's resourceful.
Every little bit counted. Even communication became a challenge. The underwater cables to Corregidor got cut.
So how did they talk to headquarters?
Pure ingenuity. They took a signal lamp, put it inside the open breech of one of the 6-inch guns, and aimed the gun barrel directly at Corregidor's signal station.
And flashed Morse code through the gun barrel.
Exactly. Kept communications open after the cables failed. Just amazing improvisation.
And they even had to replace their flag.
Yeah, the original flags kept getting shot down or shredded by shell fire. So the soldiers hand-painted an American flag onto a sheet of salvaged metal and flew that instead.
Wow. That shows incredible spirit.
It really does. And remember, those 14-inch guns were still firing, still effective, just 5 minutes before the final surrender order came through.
A tenacious defense right to the very end. But that wasn't the end of Fort Drum's combat story, was it? Fast forward 3 years, 1945.
Right. U.S. forces are back, retaking the Philippines. By April 45, Fort Drum was the last Japanese strongpoint holding out in Manila Bay.
Still defiant. So how did the Americans take it back? Another long siege?
No, they went for a more direct approach this time. April 13th, 1945. First, heavy bombing and naval gunfire to soften it up.
Standard procedure.
Then came the clever part. They used a modified landing ship medium, an LSM. It had a special bridge, like an extendable ramp, built onto it.
To get troops onto the top deck.
Exactly. They ran the LSM right up to the side of the fort, extended the bridge, and troops rushed across. They quickly secured the top deck.
Trapping the Japanese garrison inside.
Yep. And apparently among the Japanese defenders were survivors from the battleship Musashi, which had been sunk earlier. Trapped inside the concrete battleship now.
The irony. So the Americans held the top, but the enemy was still inside. How did they clear it? Couldn't just shell it again?
They used a pretty brutal method, different from what they'd used on Fort Hughes nearby. Combat engineers got to work.
What did they do?
They pumped a mixture of gasoline and fuel oil down into the fort's air vents. Thousands of gallons.
Oh, wow. Basically filling the inside with flammable fumes.
That was the plan. Then they lowered charges of TNT attached to incendiary grenades down the vents on a timed fuse.
And detonated it.
The explosion was immense. One source says a 1-ton steel access hatch was blown 300 feet into the air. Parts of the reinforced concrete walls were blown out.
Must have been catastrophic inside.
Absolutely devastating. The heat and fires inside were so intense that the U.S. troops couldn't even enter to check for 5 days.
5 days.
Yeah, it just burned and smoldered when they finally got in.
What did they find?
All 58 Japanese soldiers inside were dead. 6 had suffocated. The other 62 were found burned in the boiler room area.
A terrible end. And American casualties in the assault.
Incredibly light. Only 3 Americans were slightly wounded during the whole operation.
So that finally silenced Fort Drum and ended the fight for Manila Bay.
Yes, the capture of Fort Drum and the other island forts marked the end of organized Japanese resistance there.
So after all that, what happened to the concrete battleship after the war? Just left there.
Pretty much abandoned, yeah. The ruins are still there today. Turrets disabled, guns damaged, some askew, just sitting at the mouth of the bay.
Has anyone tried to salvage it or anything?
Well, starting in the 1970s, people started going in and looting scrap metal from the interior. Unauthorized salvage.
But they couldn't get the big guns out.
No, just too big, too heavy. That's why they're still there. One of the 14-inch barrels is visibly knocked crooked, probably from the recapture explosion or later attempts to move it.
So just slowly decaying. Does it serve any purpose at all now?
Actually, yes. In 2001, the Philippine Coast Guard put an automated navigation light on the top deck.
Ah, so it's a lighthouse, basically.
A navigational aid, yeah, guiding ships through the channel. So in a way, it still guards the bay, just differently.
Who looks after it now? Is it accessible?
Nominally, Fraile Island falls under the Philippine Marines, along with nearby Carabao Island. but they're unoccupied, and getting out there is apparently quite difficult for the public.
So a silent ruin helping ships find their way. Quite a change.
Its primary job now is just being a marker on the water.
Looking back then, what really makes Fort Drum stand out in history?
Well, obviously the unique concrete battleship design. That's unforgettable.
The only one of its kind with those turrets.
Exactly. The only U.S. coastal fort like it.
Yeah.
And the huge cost, which meant they never built another.
And its performance in the war.
Its sheer toughness.
Right.
The way it soaked up that incredible pounding in 1942 and kept fighting. The main guns never being silenced by enemy fire.
Until the garrison disabled them themselves.
Right. And being the last big guns firing for the Allies before the surrender in Manila Bay. It's just this incredible story of transformation. Vital defense post, besieged fortress, captured stronghold, and now an abandoned monument.
The concrete testament to a really unique chapter in military engineering and history.
Absolutely.
So, to wrap up our deep dive today, Fort Drum. The audacious design, its crucial, brutal role in World War II, the incredible ingenuity of the guys stuck inside during that siege.
And now this rusting hulk, those aha moments too, the powder getting hot and extending the gun range. You can't beat stories like that.
Or flashing Morse code through a gun barrel. The sheer resilience of the structure itself, only to be finally breached from the inside out during the recapture.
A powerful, kind of unsettling final act for the fortress itself.
Well, you've been listening to the deep dive on Fort Drum, the concrete battleship. We really hope we've managed to bring its amazing story to life for you without completely drowning you in details.
Yeah, it's quite a tale. And it leaves you thinking, doesn't it, with how warfare keeps changing. Are there modern versions of these kinds of fixed, supposedly impregnable defenses?
Good question. What would a modern Fort Drum look like? Or is the whole idea obsolete?
Maybe, or maybe they exist, but face different kinds of threats, different vulnerabilities we haven't thought of yet. It's definitely something to ponder, that balance between static defense and, the dynamics of modern conflict.
Something for you to chew on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.